What I aim to do here is simply just to introduce a few ideas about why collaborating or working with parents is so very important. And to do this, I just would like to share a little bit about the development of formal collaboration with parents in schools in Hong Kong, a little bit about uh, some possible positive outcomes for student learning that come from close collaboration with parents, and then just introduce a few ideas about how parents can work with teachers to support students. And that leads up to a short questionnaire that I'm going to ask you to complete before class. So this little chart simply tries to show the evolution of formal parent-teacher collaboration in Hong Kong. Now, it's interesting, up until the 1990s, there weren't any real set policies on this. This started to change in 1992 when the Education Commission started to establish a committee in order to look at how uh, schools could cooperate with the home. Now, the Education Committee is the top policy making body in Hong Kong uh, for for education policy. So it's quite significant. This led a few years later, in part, to the Code of Ethics, which includes a little bit on the role of the responsibilities of teachers in working with parents. And finally, in 1997, to school performance indicators, which included a school family community aspect. In 1998, the first Parent Teachers Association were established in 18 districts across Hong Kong. And then they've spread to be a bit more common now. There's actually guidelines on how to set up a PTA that schools can adopt. And then 2003, the Teacher Competency Framework also has references to parent-teacher cooperation and the teacher's role in working with parents. So you can see that over about a 10-year period, there's quite a lot that developed from really not being focused on this sort of cooperation to having it embedded in some official documentation and some practices. So this slide has two tables that summarize findings from an American study on parent involvement in children's education in school. And what it does in table 5 is we see a couple things here. First of all, we see the grade point averages. So using GPAs, a 0 would be an F and a 4 would be an A. So what this is showing us is the relationship of high teacher support and parent involvement on student learning. So what we see here, where it says 2.5, this is where we have a correlation of high levels of teacher support and high parent involvement in student learning. And this seems to result in the highest grade point average. You'll look at the other three, which have either low parent involvement or a combination of high parent involvement and low teacher support. The GPAs are all quite low. So it seems that where we have both parent involvement and teacher support for student learning, we get the highest grades for students. Table 6 is a little bit different. Table 6 shows us the relationship of a student's sense of belonging in school and parent involvement in school. And here we see again where students have this high sense of belonging, feelings of security, this kind of a thing. And parent involvement is also high. We have the highest grade point averages. where we have low parent involvement or a low sense of student belonging, we have low grades. So the interesting thing here is it's not only parent involvement that leads to high grades, but it certainly is a very important contributing factor. So if these results were to hold true in Hong Kong as well, and I don't know of a particular study right now that shows this, but if they were to hold true, it would suggest that in Hong Kong as well, we should be encouraging high parent involvement. This would be something interesting to investigate, I think. So let's just think a little bit about ways that parents can be involved in student learning and in their relationship to their involvement in school. So these next few slides come from a study by Esther Ho that's a little bit old, but I think it's still interesting. So this slide has to do with how parents relate to schools. And there's a few different models that Ho explains. So one is the market model, and this is basically the idea that parents see school as something that they shop around for. In other words, they decide which schools to put their children into based on the best opportunities that they get for their kids. Maybe it's a school where students do very well on exams, or maybe it's a school that specializes in something like music. So parents make these choices. So schools, therefore, have a relationship like any other sort of business, I guess, where if parents don't like what's going on, they remove their kid. Another way of thinking about the relationship of parents to schools is the client model. And the client model is the idea that, well, schools are providing a service, and in this case, teachers are the experts on student learning, and that's the service they provide. And so in this model, parents would tend to, I suppose, accept the viewpoints of teachers as the experts and perhaps be less directly involved in their students' education and their child's education. And then there's the representation model. And so this is the notion that schools make decisions based on the involvement of parents. So perhaps this is the more collaborative type of model uh, whereby we would have both parents and teachers and school administrators working together to make decisions. The next slide elaborates a bit on this. So this is how parents are involved in governance of a school. And so there's different models for this too. So governance has to do with the big picture decisions made about how a school runs. And schools are often run in, well, these three different ways. So one is community control, and this is where parents really determine a lot about how schools are structured, hiring of teachers, school policies, things like this. This sort of thing is encouraged more and more with PTAs to some degree. In some cases, there might be parents who are involved in the school sponsoring bodies that set up schools to begin with. In those cases, you might see higher degrees of community control. Teacher control model is a bit different. This is where teachers' opinions tend to carry a lot of weight with school governance. And so policies are made based with a lot of teacher input. And parents may be informed of policy decisions, or they might be consulted, but it's usually the teachers' opinions that carry the greatest weight in governance. The third model, which I think might be the most common in Hong Kong, is the principal control model. And this is where really The principal makes the decisions. Uh, the school sponsoring bodies that are formally responsible for governance tend to view the principal as the person who is their chief advisor, and they tend to do what the principal suggests. And the principal may or may not consult relevant stakeholders like teachers and parents. So I guess a lot of what sort of model you think is most appropriate has to do with what your beliefs are about how much role parents should have in making decisions for the school. School activities for parents. So also we find that there's different ways that schools try to involve parents in the life of the school. They could be information giving activities, education activities like teaching parents how to be parents, for example, or other sorts of after school courses, and then opportunities to collaborate, like on a PTA or something like this. Or perhaps parents will sometimes supervise uh, school visits, classroom visits on field trips, things like this. And then this is probably the one that's most important for student learning, and it's just the three different most common ways that parents try to do things to support their child's learning. So one is the home enrichment model. So this is where parents actually do more than is needed in the curriculum to help their students learn, providing them with all kinds of resources, reading with them, taking them to libraries, uh, buying them books and other sorts of materials that might help them to learn. So it's really doing more than what is required by the school. Home supervision. This is when parents are involved in doing things like checking homework, making sure that students get their work done. And then home regulation. So this is a little bit more along the lines of setting up rules to make sure students get their work done. So monitoring them, developing a schedule for them, putting limits on their activities, saying maybe you can only watch half an hour of TV a day and you must sit in this particular spot and do your homework after dinner, or something like this. So regulation is setting up the rules. Supervision is more ensuring that work is done, and enrichment is providing additional opportunities. Now, what do you think would be the most common kinds of parent involvement that teachers would ask for? So the little task for this week is this. There's a little online quiz that asks questions related to the slides I just reviewed. And I'd like you just to, on the discussion forum, write a little thought about what you think is the best way teachers can involve parents in student learning and why. And that is it. So this would probably only take you about 10 or 15 minutes to do the quiz. It's not very long. And just a few minutes to post your thoughts on parent collaboration with teachers to support student learning.